Alright, so we're taking another day to work on the imaginary I. This time we're going to look at solving equations and how I comes into play to allow us to solve an equation all the way to the end. So, we have x squared plus 64 equals 0. We're going to solve for x, which means we will subtract 64 from both sides. X squared equals negative 64. Then, to undo a square, we square root both sides. So that gives us x equals the square root of a negative 64. So before we would say there's no real number for x because you can't square root a negative number. However, now we know a way around this. We can bring in I. So square root of that negative 1 is I. And then the square root of 64 is 8, so we actually have 8i. Then the other thing that we have to know and kind of remember about equations like this is that there are going to be two answers. It's kind of like, if you remember back to the equations, if it was just x squared equals 64, well, x could be an 8, because 8 squared is 64, but x could also be a negative 8, because negative 8 is also 64. So any of these x squared equations where you end up square rooting both sides, we're going to have two answers, so we just put a plus or minus in front of our final answer like that. Alright, let's take a look at another one. So we have an x squared here, 4x squared, and an x squared here, so let's go ahead and get those on the same side. I'm going to subtract an x squared from both sides. Leaves me with 3x squared equals negative 18. Now I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So x squared equals negative 6. Then to undo the square, I square root both sides. So x equals, and I'm going to remember that this has two answers, so plus or minus. The square root of negative 1 is I. And then the square root of 6, we don't know and can't be reduced, so it stays as the square root of 6. So x equals plus or minus I times the square root of 6. Alright, this song is from another concert. This was back in my college days at Van Andel. I believe this song was a big radio hit for this group, so maybe you'll recognize it.
Broke into the old apartment. This is where we used to live. Broken glass, broken hungry, broken hearts and broken bones. This is where we used to live. Why did you paint the walls? Why did you clean the floor? Why did you plaster over the hole I punched in the door? This is where we used to live. Why did you keep the mousetrap? Why didn't you keep the dish rack? These things used to be mine. I guess they still are. I want them back. Broke into the old apartment. 42 steps from the street. Crooked landing, crooked landlord, narrow laneway filled with crooks. This is where